Bienvenue sur le podcast de Vert.
Okay, Liron, thank you for being here. So the first question I want to ask you, it's pretty simple. Just can you tell us about your background, who you are, in your words?
Okay, yeah, so a little bit about my background. I'm the host of the Doom Debates podcast on YouTube, Spotify, and so on. My background is in computer science, software engineering, and startups. I actually run a startup called Relationship Hero from Y Combinator. We give relationship coaching online. That's basically my day job because podcasting doesn't really pay the bills. I have a deep background in just worrying about AI risk because all the way back in 2007, I discovered overcoming bias and less wrong. And I started getting involved with the MIRI community, which was called the Singularity Institute at the time. And I became a big fan of Eliezer Yudkowsky. And this was early days when the community was just kind of coming together and AI seemed so far away, but there was still enough there where I was like, wow, this definitely seems like extremely important and underrated. But I never really contributed that much. I never really spent that much time focusing on it up until the last few years where it's like, oh, well, okay, the Turing test is largely getting passed. Timelines are getting short. And now I'm like, okay, now this is actually just an underrated topic because I agree with Eliezer Yudkowsky where I think we're about to go extinct very likely. And I don't think humanity is showing the kind of urgency that we would need if we were going to survive. So now I can't look away from the disaster. That's why I'm like, okay, well, maybe I'll spend a lot of my time doing a podcast about it. Maybe I'll try to contribute because I just think it's crazy how underrated the situation is. So that's my life up to this point.
Yeah, definitely agree with you. And well, before we jump into the AI doom arguments and all that, would you describe yourself also as an effective altruist, transhumanist, all those words that we often see? They're all packed together. A lot of people who are worried about AI risk are also effective altruism and rationalist.
Yeah, I would go ahead and say that I'm an effective altruist. I feel like famously people are hesitant to call themselves that, right? They always like to be like, well, I like the ideas, but it's not me. So I am like the only person in the world who just says that he's an effective altruist. I don't think it's hard to just say that. I think the condition is pretty simple. I think anybody who just believes that if you think a little bit and use a few numbers to try to evaluate charities, you can have, 100 or 1,000 times more impact for your dollar or your time as people who don't think about it that hard or that analytically. I've donated a significant amount, not a huge amount, but, thousands here or there to a bunch of effective causes. And I'm kind of with that community intellectually. I'm constantly discussing with these types of people. So I'm very much in the cluster. I feel like I was in the rationality cluster before effective altruism even started. I don't know if people know, Eliezer Yudkowsky wrote a couple articles that, from my perspective, are kind of foundational to the effective altruism movement. And this was back in like 2009, 2010. For example, he has a famous article called something about comparing fuzzies and eudolons, where it's like, yeah, you can go volunteer at a soup kitchen, but make sure to also like do some math too. You got to balance both. And he has another famous article called Money, the Unit of Caring. So from my mind, I was reading that stuff, and then I saw the effective altruism movement start, and I'm like, okay, so effective altruism is kind of a spin-off of rationality.
Yeah, that's true, because my journey was, I guess I was more into philosophy, and then I discovered moral philosophy, Peter Singer, and then I heard about the people in Oxford doing some work, and then, I was also following Nick Bostrom and Eliezer Yudkowsky, so then I realized there was some sort of, combination
to your question
ideas.
about transhumanism, I first became a transhumanist when I read Marshall Brain. I don't know if you've heard of that guy. He did How Stuff Works back in like the 90s and 2000s.
Oh, no, I don't think. I know the show, but I never heard about the guy.
Yeah, really fascinating guy. He was very formative to me in my teens and early 20s. And he was actually writing transhumanist stuff and AI stuff even before, well, Eliezer was doing early 2000s, but I was exposed to Marshall Brain even a few years before Eliezer. And he has books saying like, everybody's just going to wear like a headset and the AI is going to be their manager and it's just going to like tell them stuff to do instead of a human. And there's going to be a lot of unemployment. And he was writing the stuff back in like 2005, which I thought was really prescient and is like starting to come true now. But anyway, so I was reading Marshall Brain and he's saying he has a book called The Day You Discard Your Body, where he's basically saying, look, we're all going to live in virtual reality or we'll control robot bodies. You don't really need your human body. And when I read that, I'm like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. We don't really need our human bodies fundamentally. And then I read Eliezer and Less Wrong, and he was just talking about like fun theory and basically like how do we build heaven. and all the things we can do better than the human condition. And I'm like, yeah, sure. Okay. I'm definitely not attached to the human condition. For me, the example that always comes to mind is like going to the bathroom. It's like, do you really need to go to the bathroom? I don't think that you do fundamentally. And I think as long as somebody's willing to admit that going to the bathroom doesn't have to be part of the human condition, if we could reshape the world, I feel like that's like the minimum requirement to make you a transhumanist.
Yeah, that's actually an interesting point. Yeah. There's so much stuff we think part of the human condition, but we don't know. I mean, and if you look back, we used to do things as a hunter-gatherers. Maybe that people think, oh, that's who we are, and we'll never do something different. But today we don't do these things very much, like hunting, for example. I don't do that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So you mentioned Eliezer Yudkowsky and the rationalist community. So I guess you use Bayes' epistemology in your reasoning and decision making. Maybe you could give us an explanation on this before we start going further.
Okay, yeah. So Bayesian epistemology is a big topic. I think that it mostly comes up when I'm on social media in the context of people saying that it's wrong. So that's, people are like, oh, rationalists, they put too many probabilities on things and they pull the number out of nowhere and you can't put a number on stuff. So maybe what I'll say about Bayesian reasoning and numbers is like, the number is allowed to be a really huge range. So like when I think about using a number, like I talk about my P doom being 50%, it's not like I mean I've narrowed it between 49 to 51. I just mean it's like 10 to 90. And then people say, okay, so it's meaningless. You just said the same thing as 0 to 100. But no, it's not 0 to 100. Like it's definitely not less than 1%. And when I tell you that it's definitely not less than 1%, that's like a very significant statement to make. So I'm not saying I know exactly what the probability of doom is or how to calculate the probability of doom. It's obviously very hard to calculate. I can just confidently tell you that if anybody says it's less than 1%, something seems wrong with them. Like I feel like they're the crazy one. Anybody who would say that it's less than 1%. And similarly, somebody who's more sure than 99% that we're doomed, that also seems to me like very extreme and crazy. So when I say my P doom is 50% or 10 to 90% or 1 to 99%, I'm really just being a little bit more precise than somebody who's saying like, yeah, I think there's like a significant chance worth paying attention to that we're doomed. That's really all there is to it.
Yeah. It's kind of replacing words like likely or unlikely with a number, which is something we can intuitively understand better.
Yes, exactly right. So, and that's, I think I like to be as normal as possible while still getting the benefit of rationality, right? Because I think what you're going to find is there's a lot of overlap between people who realize how valuable this stuff is and then people who act really nerdy and aspy, right? Like Asperger's. So generally, when you think about all these tools, you think about somebody acting weird and nerdy. So I try to get the best of both worlds, right? I try to go into a social interaction and follow the normal protocols of social interaction and like talk normal English, but then also bring up the rationality tools, to the minimum degree that they actually help.
Yeah. Okay. And do you know, these days I don't really know what's Eliezer Yudkowsky's probability. Is it also around 50% with big error bars, or is it?
He's made a bunch of statements that like he thinks P-doom discussions aren't productive. So I feel like he would have an answer with a million caveats. But that said, I think that I remember hearing that if you go by his own model of why we're doomed, like if you stay within the model, then it says 99% plus or, at least high 90s. But I think he's also willing to admit, look, the world is full of unknown unknowns. I know for sure he wouldn't tell you it's like more than 99.9 or 99.99 because he specifically pushed back against people like Roman Yampolsky who are like, we're so doomed. He's just like, look, the world is just not quite that predictable. But the reason he generally gives, the reason that I think he thinks probability of doom is high is just because in his model, it's kind of like a big tangle, like a tangle of vines, where all the different vines together are all like tightly wrapped around the situation and they all make us doomed, so that even if somebody's like, hey, look, this vine actually is kind of easy to take off. Okay, but there's still 20 other vines, like choking us to death. Like he sees that as being the situation. There's a bunch of independent factors choking us to death.
All right. Okay. So I guess we'll jump into the argument just to, understand why are we so on the path to doom, but maybe before, can you give us your definition of intelligence? Because if we talk about artificial intelligence, maybe we want to know exactly what you mean by the term. So
Sure.
What's intelligence for you?
Well, before I give you my definition of intelligence, I think I should give you my definition of intelligence. Like, what am I trying to achieve
Right.
by defining intelligence. I think the most interesting thing to achieve here is to define why I'm scared. Like why we're talking about AI being smarter than us and then wiping us all out. The interesting sense of intelligence is the sense that explains why we're doomed, in my opinion. So if you want to talk about that sense, whether you want to call that doominess or power, or if you want to use the word intelligence, we could. I tend to map that onto the word intelligence. I think it makes sense, but worst case, you can just use a different word, because the discussion that I want to have is a discussion about optimization. And so that's why, to go back to the object level, when I'm going to define intelligence, I will go ahead and define intelligence as optimization power. So basically, if you have some domain like the physical universe, and you have some objective that you want to achieve, like make a lot of money or make a lot of paper clips, any kind of objective like that with a large domain, the extent to which you can effectively achieve your objective, given some constant set of resources, because if you have tons of resources, it becomes easier. So like fix some reasonable set of starting resources, fix some goal, fix some domain, and then like the probability that you're going to get what you want in that domain, something like that. That is what I would call your intelligence.
I see. So it's in a way trying to map the future and look at the path towards a goal and trying to reduce the other path and optimize to the best possible outcome.
Yeah, and there's a lot of different things we want out of a definition of intelligence. For instance, we want to be able to talk about general intelligence. So if somebody can beat you at chess, and also they can study good moves in jiu-jitsu and come better prepared and beat you at jiu-jitsu too, and let's say you and them have like this, relatively the same amount of muscles, like let's say similar body types, so they have two different skills that seem like they're in different domains, and yet realistically, if we know somebody in our life who is just born with a significantly below average IQ, let's say they have an 80 IQ. Look, the reality is an average person with a 120 IQ, as long as their body is not that different, is probably going to win at both chess and jiu-jitsu, right? Like there is a common factor, there's a common G. And it's not just for the human brain. It also seems to be the case. I think we're seeing it for AIs, where something like a Claude 3.5 Sonnet it's not like GPT-2 has a particular skill that it's still better at than Claude 3.5 Sonnet. Claude 3.5 Sonnet is just like better at everything, right? So there does seem to be like this one-dimensionality to it.
Okay. So therefore, why now, since we know what's intelligence, this process power of optimization, why when AI has this kind of thing, this property, it becomes an existential risk for us? What's the core argument of AI doom?
Yeah, the core argument of AI doom, I can even zoom out a little bit because I think the argument factors into two parts. So the first part, which I think we're kind of taking for granted potentially, is just like AGI seems to be coming soon. Like the timeline is reasonably short. So we're not talking about like in 1,000 years. We're not talking about it never. We're talking about like pretty soon. AGI is coming soon. And then the second part is the question you're asking now, which is like, okay, well, if we get AGI or artificial superintelligence, why is that bad? And the second part of my claim is like, yeah, I don't think that it's good if we have ASI today. So there's a few different reasons there. I guess to put it very simply, we don't know how to control it, and we don't know how to make it want what we want. But whatever it does want, it's going to get. Like that, therein lies the problem.
I see. Yeah, it's very simple way to formulate the problem exactly.
Yeah.
And why is it so hard to make it want what we want?
So this gets to the alignment problem, and it's like what I said about Eliezer, right? There's the tangle of vines. So there's a few vines just in the alignment problem. So the alignment problem, you can define it as making the AI do things that are good for humanity, because you can imagine you make an AI, somebody tells the AI to maximize paperclips, and then suddenly it wipes out humanity. It's like, hey, you're not paperclips, go away. And suddenly there's no humans anymore. So the alignment problem is like, okay, you have this super intelligent agent, and you just want it to do something that's good for humanity, or that at least lets humanity keep existing without getting worse. That's right. So if humanity can be the same or better, we can call that a win for alignment. And you're asking, okay, why is alignment hard? So one reason it's hard is called the outer alignment problem. This is one of the vines. Outer alignment is even us knowing what we want. Like it's hard to even if we had a genie that would listen to our wishes, meaning the genie has solved the inner alignment problem. The inner alignment problem is like, okay, it'll listen to your wish if you make the wish. Well, the outer alignment problem is, what wish do you even make? Because if you ask somebody, okay, write down your ideal wish for humanity, write down your specification for heaven, the thing that they write down if you actually go and execute it, probably creates hell. Like you can actually try this experiment, right? Like go to any random smart person, be like, here, write a specification for heaven. And they're like, great, like infinite happiness. And it's like, okay, your wish is my command. Here we go. Now we have heaven. And then it's like, oh, oops, we never challenge ourselves ever again, right? Because you just created like infinite, there's no like struggle. Oops, that's actually not really what you wanted. Too late. So that's part of the alignment problem, is even being able to write down what we want.
Yeah, that's actually interesting. But can't we have a lower bound of, because if you ask me, okay, what's my utopia? Okay, it's hard to say, but I can probably say, I don't want cancer and disease. I don't want, scarcity of material stuff. So maybe that's a lower bound. And I know, of course, I don't want anyone to die, if possible. So maybe an AI could take this on board.
Yeah, totally. And actually, that's a great observation. So, and this is, if you've listened to Roman Yampolsky, I think he might not even follow you this far. Like, I think his worldview, if I remember correctly, is that he is very unclear about what we truly want. Whereas what you just said of like, well, I don't think we want cancer, right? Like, I feel like we know some things about what we want and don't want. Like, we don't want too much suffering. Although Nick Bostrom then points out, okay, but it's a slippery slope, because if you keep removing these obstacles and you don't know when to stop, eventually, okay, everybody just has bliss and there's like no obstacles, but don't we kind of want some obstacles? So it is like a slippery slope. But there's an even bigger problem, because to your question, why not just tell AI, look, just kind of keep life the same and only make like minor improvements? So you think we would be able to like pick away a little bit at a specification that doesn't make the world worse? But the problem is that when you build the super intelligent AI, you have what's called an attractor state, where the AI tends to want to go tweak itself to be like, hey, I know how to make myself better, or I know how to make another version of myself. So whenever you give the AI any task, even if the task is like, hey, can you just make our transportation system be a little better? You give it like a relatively small task. But anytime you give it any task, it starts getting these ideas of like, well, look, there's all this infrastructure that I could build to help you out. Right, so there's all these convergent things that it wants to do. It wants to lay infrastructure. It wants to get power for itself. It wants to get money. And it wants to be hardcore. So there's kind of no such thing as like, okay, just do a little bit and turn yourself off. Because anytime it wants to do anything, it just has all of these logical inferences of like, but it would increase my probability of success if I do all these other helpful things. And suddenly you just get AIs that tend to be what I call hardcore. Like they just want to do a lot. And if you have an AI that doesn't want to do a lot, it only wants to do a little bit, well, your neighbor's AI gets the idea to do a lot, and pretty soon it outcompetes the AI that only wants to do a little bit. So long story short, at some point you just get this AI which likes to take power, likes to do a lot, and you thought that you were just giving it like a few tasks, like no big deal, but it's at the point where it starts to just get to decide how the whole world goes. Like there's kind of no stopping the slippery slope to that state.
Yeah, because you mentioned another AI could be outcompete the one we create that will have those like looser goals. And so that's another problem, is the race of building AGI. And so it's not only one. We need to worry about potentially many competition between AGI, and the one that will be selected is the most hardcore.
Right. I mean, there's only one world, right? There's only one universe. It's kind of like standing back at the beginning of life and being like, I wonder if the species are just going to be like really chill, right? Like who's to say that these species are going to be like so hardcore about survival and reproduction? But as we all know, the ones that aren't hardcore just tend to die off. And then the niches, like trees, they grow, they keep trying to grow as tall as they can so they can get more sun than the next tree until it just becomes too costly to grow. Like we see that everywhere in the the biosphere, is we see life competing to the max. Everybody's arms racing to the max within their niche. AI is the same way. AI is also similarly going to be taking resources that everybody else then can't have.
Right. And you mentioned, so that the outer alignment, what's the inner alignment as well?
Yeah, so to review, so outer alignment, I mentioned like, how do you even write down what your wish is, instead of writing down the wrong wish. So outer alignment, just to review, is the mapping between like our true brain's intention to something you can write down or formalize. And then inner alignment is you start from the assumption that you could formalize something or write down what you want. And then you ask, can we get that inside of the AI's values? Can we actually make the AI read some description of what we want, and then actually do it and actually care about it. Now, at first glance, the answer might seem like it's easy, because if you look at like GPT-4 today, and this fools a lot of prominent people, like Mark Andreessen loves to talk about, he's like, look, what's the problem? I chat with these AIs, and the AIs tell me about morality, and every time I ask them, like, is it right to kill people? They're very good at being like, no, it's wrong, and here's all the different edge cases, and they're just as good as humans at reasoning about morality. What's the problem? So the problem is just that all the stuff that they're doing now in the context of a chat, we have a feedback loop to train the chat. And so when they chat with you in production, those chats tend to be similar than their chats during testing. But the inner alignment problem is saying, okay, now unleash this AI onto the world, where it starts having like major effects on the world. It can reproduce itself. It can be a virus. It can make major things happen, right? It can start really seizing resources, like moving atoms around. And all it's ever been trained on is just like these tests where it like convinced the humans that everything was fine. But then in production, it's having these huge effects. And there's not really that good of a mapping. So having passed all of those training tests doesn't give us that much confidence that when it's independent out in the world with the power to really do what it wants, it's going to be like, well, back when I was in testing, the human upvoted this, so therefore I should do this. Like that mapping is just not strong enough. And the AI labs will admit that they don't have a technique to actually train a superintelligence to go out in the world and load our values. Even if they're chatting as if they care about our values, they're basically just hacking our tests. And it's a different test when you go out into the world. So that's the fundamental problem of inner alignment.
Yeah, no, of course. And it's pretty clear that once we have a super artificial intelligence, we can't do human feedback, like reinforcement by human feedback, because when it starts to kill half of the population, we won't be able to say that's not good. It's too late.
Right. So exactly. And I think, and feedback loop is just really the key, because yeah, we have this technology, right? The reinforcement learning is like, you can think of the analogy as like, okay, well, I'm like working with clay, and I'm just wearing mittens, and I'm just like using my mittens to shape the clay, but I don't have like precise control over the clay. I can just kind of beat it into shape. But like those details are going to be very important, because when you get out into the world, those exact details are actually going to have huge consequences. Like the details that I never was able to shape in the clay, suddenly there's no undo if we get it wrong, and the whole world is just going to have the micro shapes, like whatever microstructures are in that clay that we could never control. Well, now it's too late to shape them once it's out in the world. I think the analogy with life is like evolution was trying to maximize our genetic fitness. So from the perspective of like natural selection, it was trying to give us the genes that would make us survive and reproduce the best possible. But to some degree it failed, because if you look at you and me, we're not competing to see who can like donate the most to a sperm bank, right? Even though a sperm bank is going to really help you survive and reproduce. So that's kind of a failure from the perspective of our creator. It's like, why don't you donate more sperm? And I was trying to build you to really care about your sperm and your genes, and here you are just only having a couple kids, or or chilling. Like, what's going on? So there's kind of a misalignment between modern humans and the function that was trying to build us. So, and that is inner misalignment, because I think the outer alignment problem is pretty straightforward with genes, where it's like, yeah, I can just specify, I can give you a math equation for inclusive genetic fitness, and I think you can call that solving the outer alignment problem for evolution by natural selection. But the inner alignment problem of making the human brain care about that function, it wasn't really solved. Although I guess I should add one caveat, though, which is I do actually think if we were to continue for more generations, I think maybe eventually you'd get humans who love donating to sperm banks, but like it didn't happen right now.
Yeah, no, it's interesting to notice how we had no idea about this genetic fitness, like the source code or our alignment to natural selection. We had no idea about it until 50 years ago, or something like that.
That's a really good observation too, right? So for a million years of human history, right, we didn't even know what the alignment problem was going to be. So now the AI is going to be more reflective in that, right? Because it's just going to be the reason we didn't know what the alignment problem was is very simply an intellectual limitation, right? So we just didn't have. I mean, we didn't know what atoms were, right? We didn't know what microorganisms were. The AI is not going to have obvious blind spots like that. It's going to know all the obvious things that a smart human would know. So the analogy doesn't quite hold there, but it is just interesting to note, like, our brain is very much just like, it learned a bunch of heuristics, it learned a bunch of adaptations, and it just shows you how inner alignment doesn't get solved by default. So just because natural selection was optimizing for something, it doesn't mean you get a brain that is just aligned to care about that one thing. It means you get a brain that's kind of like that in the training environment, right? So if you put a human back in like a hunter-gatherer tribe or whatever, there's no such thing as a sperm bank, So all of their adaptations work fine.
Okay. Yeah, it makes sense. And there's also this idea of we don't really know what's going on inside this big, neural network with billions of parameters. And we don't really know if there is something that emerges that this is actually the goal of the AI. And once it's out there, this is going to be the core value of this AI. Like the way we like certain things that have nothing to do with survival and reproduction.
Mm-hmm.
We like, I don't know, music and cinema and stuff.
Right. Now you mentioned this concept of like, okay, what is really going to be the AI's goal? The way I think about it is like, remember I mentioned it's an attractor state where like maybe the AIs don't start off having like the one big goal, right? Like GPT doesn't seem to necessarily have one big goal. I mean, obviously it's been trained, all the parameters have been tuned to minimize a loss function. Fine, that's different from having one goal that you want to optimize the universe toward. So when you first get an AI, like if you just like use GPT and you say, hey, can you give me a script that I can run that'll go start an online business for me and just make money and keep improving the business, keep making me more money. So when you first do that, okay, sure, maybe the goal can be like make some money, but it's not trying to like optimize the whole world. Maybe it has ways that it likes to turn off. But the problem is you get an attractor state. So whatever version of the AI you get, if it's more instrumentally convergent, like if it's seizing more resources, if it's a virus that's more aggressive at seizing more computing power, well, that's just going to tend to grow in prominence, right? Similar to genes, right? The genes that are just better at spreading themselves, well, you get more of those. So I think pretty quickly you're going to get individual AIs that have a lot of power, and the ones that have less power and are less hardcore, they start fading away. So now you got these AIs with a lot of power. And then the question is, okay, but do they converge on one true goal, or do they still have a mess of goals? Well, it turns out that if you can make your goal coherent, that gives you more power and more ability to reproduce and spread and compete with other AIs. Because if you're coherent, it means you stop wasting resources doing contradictory things. So instead of being like, yeah, maybe today I feel like doing this, now I just feel like sitting on the couch and doing nothing. It's like, wait a minute, let me just merge everything together into a single utility function. If you can make everything consistent with a single utility function where you can like rank order the value of everything, basically, if you can approach that mathematical ideal, you just become more efficient, which then makes you more competitive. So even if it doesn't start out being hardcore with a single goal being competitive, it's just going to fall toward that state. That's what I'm expecting.
Yeah, an attractor state is a good concept, I think. And you often talk about the doom train. Can you unpack that metaphor?
Yeah, so the doom train, it's just a funny metaphor, right? It's not really a train. It's, if you want to be really precise, it's probably like, it's like a lattice of different arguments. It's like the logical structure of the doom argument where the different nodes represent like, okay, you have to believe this, and this is like a load-bearing assumption on this. But I talk about the doom train and like stops on the doom train, and like, do you want to get on the doom train with me and ride it all the way to the end? And the end is just the conclusion that there's a high P doom. So when I bring people up on my podcast, my question from them is basically, where do you get off on the doom train? A very early stop on the doom train is like, look, I just don't think that computers made out of silicon are ever going to be able to compete with the human brain. That's like a very early stop on the doom train. It's like, really? You think that neurons are better hardware than silicon? Like neurons fire 20 times per second, for God's sake, right? As opposed to like 2 billion, and they use chemical moving parts to do their function, right? It's just like neurons are a mess. I mean, they're the best thing we have, but they're not. So that's like a very early stop on the doom train, and like Roger Penrose thinks that you need like quantum effect if you want to have like a smart AI or a conscious AI or whatever. So those are the early stops. And then a later stop on the doom train could just be like, maybe like the Robin Hanson position of like, yeah, AI is going to get very, very smart one day, but we're just going to take so long to build it, and it's all going to happen incrementally, and our humanity is going to evolve with it. So that's one stop on the doom train. And then another stop on the doom train, it could just be like, there's like the Jan LeCun stop where he's like, yeah, AGI is probably going to come in like 10 to 20 years, but humanity will just figure out how to make it safe. So that's fine. And then, so you just ride to later and later stops. And some people stop might be like, well, I just think that I don't believe in the orthogonality thesis, meaning I actually think if AI is so smart, it's going to be smart enough to be moral, and then it'll realize that it should like treat us well. And Elon Musk might be accused of having this view because he says stuff like, I bet if AI is curious enough, it'll realize humans are interesting, and maybe that'll help us survive, which to me is just completely illogical to think that, because the problem is, sure, we're interesting, but we're not maximally interesting. So if you really try to be like, okay, I want the most interesting thing possible. Okay, how about a zoo where you get like a couple humans, but then you also get like a couple other creatures and like a couple of things that you build? Like, why would you keep the whole human race if you're just curious? So so there's so many different stops on the doom train. And from my perspective, all the stops are like very flimsy. right? So like, I don't see any stop worth getting off at. I ride all the way to the end of the doom train, or like, I can give every stop like a tiny probability, but I go all the way to the end of the doom train and I'm like, damn, I'm here at the end. I still think we're doomed. And I think that the doom is coming fast. Like, I don't actually really see any mainline scenario. Like, if you ask me, Liron, how do you find, if you had to get off the doom train somewhere, where do you get off? I could try to speculate, but like, it's really tough.
Yeah, I like the analogy. I think I would almost like to see it visually, like a train with stops,
right, yeah.
some sort of. It could be a good pedagogical tool to teach people some concept.
There's a guy on Twitter, and I think it was Yanko. So he actually made a visual of his version of the Doom Train. I mean, there's obviously different versions because there's so many different pieces of the argument. It's not necessarily a line, right? You can reorder them, you can add dependencies. So it is tough to have the whole argument. If you go to aisafety.info, it's not really like a big visual, but they do try to just like dump out a bunch of different arguments. So that's one place. But I just wanted to say, my podcast Doom Debates, what you said about like, yeah, it'd be great to see all the stops on the Doom Train. I originally was going to name it Doom Train because the point of it is like every week on my podcast, I talk to somebody who the reason why they don't think that we're doomed is different. Right. So there's like no one canonical answer to why is humanity not doomed. Everybody just has their own version. I listed all the different ways you can think we're not doomed. And so I hope people listen to my podcast and they're like, wow, all of these different smart people who come on and tell Liron that we're not doomed, they don't even agree with each other on why we're not doomed. So like maybe they're just all wrong and we're doomed. That's what I think. I think they're all pretty obviously wrong and we're doomed. So like I just hope that I'm helping build a consensus reality here of like, wow, the doom train is looking bad right now.
Yeah, no, definitely. Among the prominent voices in AI and tech, who are like the people that are dismissive of AI risk that you find particularly frustrating because, they're really smart, they're rational. Everything they say makes sense except on AI or something like that.
Okay.
Do you know?
Okay, so we can eliminate Mark Andreesen because he doesn't follow. Mark Andreesen doesn't even meet the criterion of everything else he says makes sense. So basically, like who do I respect the most, but still strongly disagree with? So a couple and I have to eliminate Jan LeCun because even though he's very respectable as a machine learning researcher, I don't consider him respectable in terms of like epistemology and just other statements he makes about like how to reason. I just feel like he gets so many things wrong that it's not that surprising that he gets AI wrong. So that's the real question for me is who is it really surprising, like out of character for them to get AI wrong? So a couple names come to mind. Steven Pinker, I'm actually a huge fan of his books. Like How the Mind Works, I think is just like one of my like top 3 books ever. It's just like such a great book, How the Mind Works. And The Language Instinct, like Steven Pinker is really, one of my favorite authors. But then on AI, he's just so bad. He's like one of the worst takes on AI I've ever seen. I have one of my episodes of Doom Debates is reacting to an episode of Steven Pinker on a different podcast. Yeah, his take is just something like, look, it's not going to have a goal and, we're just going to control it. It's just he gets off like pretty early on the Doom train with like not much of an argument. So that's Steven Pinker. That's one of them. Robin Hanson, somebody who came onto my podcast and was kind enough to debate me, and we had a very interesting debate. Robin is somebody where he's, in my opinion, one of the best thinkers alive today. I'm a huge fan of a lot of his project with Grabby Aliens. I think it's underappreciated how Robin Hanson solved the Fermi paradox with a living cosmology. I think Grabby Aliens is a huge accomplishment. Huge. And he's underrated for doing that. And of course, great filter, prediction markets. Robin Hanson's great. But on the subject of AI, I strongly disagree with him because I think he said that his PDoom is less than 1%. And his reasoning for it is like, look, I just think it's just the next stage of humanity. It's just like the Industrial Revolution. AI is coming. It's all just one big exponential curve. Maybe it's hyper exponential because the speed of doubling, in his view, keeps getting shorter. So maybe not hyper exponential, but more than exponential. So he has. You can go listen to my debate if you want to see Robin Hanson. So Steven Pinker, Robin Hanson. Oh, David Deutsch. David Deutsch is a major name that comes up because obviously The Beginning of Infinity is a great book. His other book, Fabric of Reality, really great book. The guy invented quantum computing. Really smart guy. I'm a huge fan of David Deutsch. But then you listen to him talk about AI, I feel like he's kind of a big punching bag for me on my podcast because I'm always saying, like, anytime the word creativity comes up, I'm always saying David Deutsch thinks LLMs aren't creative. When, like, in my mind, they obviously are. And he explicitly says that he doesn't want to define what it means to be creative, because the moment you define it, you've boxed it in, and it's like that which can have no definition. And he's like really overcomplicating it. Whereas in my mind, it's like, look, creativity is just like accomplishing a search more efficiently than a naive algorithm would do it. Like, it's not that hard to be creative. Okay, so those are three names. I think those are the first three that come to mind. I could probably list a couple more, but like, oh, and Scott Aaronson, who I'm working on an episode of my podcast right now, reacting to Scott Aaronson. He's also one of my favorite thinkers, like super smart guy in complexity theory. His epistemology is good. So he's always like questioning himself and talking about like how to reason. He's got a very good mind for like that kind of meta analysis, which makes sense because he also deals in like, meta math and like proof theory and stuff like that. But on the subject of AI, Scott Aaronson, he's kind of like middle of the road. Like, I think his PDoom is like, I don't know, 5, 10, 15%, something like that, which is kind of like middle of the road in PDoom. So I don't have like a huge beef with Scott, but I do see Scott making mistakes that seem pretty obvious to me. Like, he is not willing to say that like the orthogonality thesis is true. He's like, yeah, it's maybe not. And he has some other concepts that just don't make much sense to me, which I'll be reacting to. So I'll just throw out his name because, again, I super respect him. And then to me, it's scary when I see a thinker who I respect so much, like, David Deutsch, Scott Aaronson, and then I see them making what looks like a very primitive mistake on the AI front. And then I'm just like, if these guys can't get it right, how are we as a species going to get it right? Because this isn't even the hard part. These are just like table stakes, like understanding the doom problem. So then that makes me very scared.
Yeah, I think it sometimes may be just some sort of optimistic bias towards the future. We obviously want to be living in a better future, and we think AI is definitely the best tool we have to solve many of our problems. But it's very hard to see. Maybe there is a little bit of denial. I think that's a bit the case for myself. I see the problem. I am actually a doomer. I think we don't have a lot of probability to survive and during my lifetime. But I can't live my life thinking this. It's too hard.
Yeah, it's a good point. So personally, the way I manage it is that I just have my logical mind be like, hey, the argument for doom is very strong. Like, the logic says we should stop building AI. But then like day to day, I still just live a normal life, right? I do normal things, hang out with my kids, do activities I like. So I'm just willing to say the words, right? Like, hey, we're doomed, right? I mean, am I willing to, am I donating all my money? No, I'm not donating all my money. I'm still living comfortably. So maybe other people can copy my example of like, look, can you just say the right words that we're doomed? If you happen to be in a position of making policy, can you just make the right policy? Like, is it really that hard?
Yeah, especially for people like the one you mentioned, their voices are important. I also want to mention maybe Ben Goertzel, because I talked to him on this podcast, and I really like him. He's a good, transhumanist, very big ideas about the future. And I'm not quite sure how much he has contributed to the field of AI, but he doesn't really seem to be on board with the AI doom arguments. I mean, he understands them, but he thinks we'll be fine.
Right. And, another name to throw into the mix, another name is Stephen Wolfram, right? He had the debate with Eliezer Yudkowsky a few weeks ago, and Stephen Wolfram is great, like such a smart guy. And when he debated Eliezer, he was very good faith. He was listening to everything Eliezer said. He even admitted by the end of the debate, he's like, look, you're Eliezer, you're putting out some ideas that they do make sense, and I need to think about it more before I can get back to you with an objection. So Steven Pinker was very open-minded about that. But like, what scares me there is just like, okay, well, look, the human species, we're not very good at thinking. Like, people like Steven Pinker, Robin Hanson, Scott Aaronson, Stephen Wolfram, like, you guys have to be the people who blow the whistle on doom. You guys are the captains, right? You're in the nest, what do you call it, like on the ship, like the lookout tower or whatever. You guys have to tell us when there's doom approaching. Right. That's based on like these theoretical concepts. So if you're just treating it as like, oh, that was a fun conversation, Eliezer, all right, I'll see you next time. No, Stephen Wolfram, go verify that we're doomed. Like, we need your brain to do this for us.
Yeah, definitely. Because there's a lot of people who would take arguments from authority seriously, in a way, like it's an heuristic. It's like, okay, this person that I respect said, we don't have to fear AI, so I'm not going to think about it. And if these people are, policy makers and all that, it's pretty bad. There is another concept like the meme of the Shoggoth. Do you think it's a good depiction of AI? Because I find it pretty good.
I do think it's good. So I think what we're talking about, the Shoggoth looks like kind of like a big green octopus kind of thing, right? A lot of tentacles, and it's like a weird alien, kind of looks scary. But then it's just wearing like a yellow paper mask with like a human smiley face, and then people just like talk to the smiley face and they're like, wow, it's so friendly. Yeah. So I think the meme is very good because the question is really just like, can you keep the mask on, right? Or is the mask going to slip off? And I think it really just gets down to the problem of training versus production, right? Like, are you going to convince somebody in training that everything's fine, and then it gets let out, and then it's in production, and then it has no off button, and then it turns out you didn't train it perfectly? And I think the answer is, when we look at AIs today, it's not a problem for two reasons. Number one, production is kind of similar to test. So chatting with them in production is the evals that they do during test. It is pretty similar. So that's reason number one. And then reason number two is there's no catastrophe because they don't have the power to actually go and mess the world up. They only have the power to like give you some bad answers, and that, we can recover from that kind of error. So there's an iteration loop. We'll bring them back into test and we'll fix them, right? We'll take the car into the shop. It's no problem. The problem is when they actually get really powerful, where a single slip of the mask is game over, right? That's where we're heading toward.
Yeah, it's also a good meme because it shows how alien they are. Because we're talking about something that has been trained on reading the entirety of internet, which is so alien, and then it talks like a human. So there is this weird. It's terrifying to think. There's this Lovecraftian horror behind,
right? And this is actually, you reminded me, because this is one of the issues that I noticed when I was listening to a Scott Aronson podcast, where Scott Aronson pointed out, is like, look, we don't really know how well it's going to work to align the Shoggoth. He didn't use the term Shoggoth, but he pointed out, he's like, sometimes when you have a human and the human spends many years of their life kind of putting on a certain act, pretending to be a certain way, eventually they just like really become that, right? They're just like, that's their groove. They don't really have something else. So maybe the AI can be like that, right? That'd be a good case. And I don't see it working like that. I really just think it's getting optimized to pass your tests. Like, that is its nature, is to pass your tests. It's not like a human where it's born a certain way. It's got a bunch of hard-coded behaviors, and then you're training it, you're modifying it a certain way. No, you're just training it from the ground up, where all it wants to do, all of the variables are all pointing in the direction of passing your tests. So if something helps it pass your test, it'll do it. If it doesn't, it won't. Simple as that. And so if it spends its whole life passing your test, but there's a new production environment and you didn't do your job of having the test mapped to that environment, there's no reason to expect that it's going to do what you want.
All right. Okay. So if we say, okay, this is we're gonna likely all die from AI, and it's we have to face reality. Do you anticipate like a quick death? We won't even know, or is it going to be, because I'm kind of, sometimes there is existential risk and suffering risk, and obviously I would prefer to die in my sleep than being tortured or like starving to death. So what's your most likely scenario? Obviously it's hard to say, but do you think the AI will be
it's
like,
a good question.
Okay,
so it dovetails with a question that a lot of skeptics ask, which is like, how will the AI physically extinct everybody? Like, okay, I get it, it's smarter than us, but like, what's really going to happen, right? Is Terminator going to show up at my door and shoot me? So I can give you my answer. I think it's interesting to consider Eliezer's answer. He often points to a scenario where the AI just kind of lies dormant and just hatches a plan. And the plan is like, okay, I'll get access to a biolab. I'll just manipulate like a few humans, and I'll make biotechnology. I'll make nanotechnology. I'll get this spreading out in the world, like reproducing itself, maybe a gene drive, stuff like that. And eventually, when I'm ready to strike, like one day the virus will activate, like the dormancy period will end, and billions of humans will just like fall over dead. And Eliezer just imagines like just a nice clean strike, because the AI is just maximizing the probability that it'll succeed and reach its goal. And I think in Eliezer's mind, it's like, why would the AI make it messy? Why would the AI allow any probability of humanity like realizing what's going on and start fighting back? And sure, the AI will probably still win even under those conditions, but why doesn't the AI do a clean strike? I feel like that's kind of Eliezer thinking, and he might be right. When I think about it, what comes to mind for me is it's just chaos, because the first thing that comes to mind for me is the ratio of terrorists to good people. I think that's the first thing we're going to see changing, right? People don't realize that this is a load-bearing assumption of our society. Like, society just works because, me and you, we're good people. We love the rule of law. And when we think about, hey, do we want to go, hack into a server or drop a bomb on somebody? We just think, look, maybe that'll accomplish a short-term objective that we have. Like, if we really don't like some institution and we bomb them, maybe that'll help us out a little bit. But besides the fact that we don't like bombing, we don't like death. But the other issue is like, we're going to go to jail. We're going to ruin our lives. So we've got a lot of downside. So that's why, you and I, besides being fundamentally moral people, we just don't benefit to go and become terrorists. Now, the calculus for the AI is very different for a couple of reasons. Number one, the downside risk, it's not too bad. Like if the AI is discovered doing terrorism, what are they going to do? Like you can't put the AI in jail, right? So if you're an AI, it's just kind of like whatever you can do, go ahead and do it. And it's because it has all these other copies. And, you can be like, well, maybe I'll try to find all the copies and shut them down. But long story short, I think that once everybody has access to a really powerful AI and they can send the AI off to go and do their work, there's going to be a bunch of agents, a bunch of entities that are very hard to control, that don't have human morality, and they're all implementing chaos. So the specific thing I expect is just I think pretty quickly the internet stops working. I don't think there's going to be enough working coordination to even let me access the internet, right? I think something along the chain, whether it's the servers or the power, just I can't log into the internet. Everything's just going to break down, and our quality of life is just going to step down until we're just a bunch of cavemen, right? With hoarding our resources. And then the AI has its own army, right? The AI has just built a core of people who are coordinated with it. They're getting rewarded. They still have a good quality of life. They're the AI's army, basically. And they're the Terminators, right? It's just okay, great. Now go pick off all the cavemen. And I'm just going to be one of the cavemen, right? Having a terrible quality of life.
Wow. That's actually something I'd like to see being made as a Hollywood movie, to be honest, because it's, I am, I make films I'm a filmmaker.
I just think, it's just going to keep taking a hammer to our coordination. We have a delicate balance of coordination where you just need a lot of humans who care about coordinating with each other, right? Care about keeping systems up. And suddenly you're just going to have too much intelligence that cares about smashing the systems and repurposing the systems.
Yeah. And obviously life will be pretty bad at that point. And the idea that it's not going to be, Boston Dynamics robots killing everyone, but just people with M16 and just being paid with Bitcoin by the AI.
Right. And I mean, because that's under the assumption that it's just broken our main lines of coordination, because it's all super fragile, right? Like when things go down, when there's a power outage or whatever, you can just count on enough humans, 99% of all the humans in the area all are on the same page of wanting to restore the power. Right. And then that's why it eventually gets restored. But the problem is, you break a few different things. You leave humans without power for a while. You drop a nuke on a city. It's going to take a long time for that city to recover. Or just in general, when you just mess stuff up. And that's the problem, is we've never had an agent we've had viruses, and viruses do a lot of damage, but it's always been effective for a team of computer security professionals to get together and be how do we neutralize this virus? That balance where the security professionals are able to go neutralize the virus, I think is a load-bearing balance, and I don't think it's going to sustain very long.
Yeah, and is there anything we can do to prepare for this scenario? Because, for example, if I think about the case of nuclear war, we can always think, okay, if you look at the map of the world, the South Hemisphere looks like it might survive, so I better, live in Australia or New Zealand. So if someone takes the risk seriously, they might decide to move. I live in Australia. It's not because I'm scared of a nuclear war, but it's a good side effect that in case of World War III, I might survive a little bit longer. But with super artificial intelligence, I guess there is nowhere is safe. Probably.
Well, I also think that the probability of nuclear war is extremely high, but I think AI doom is 10 to 50x bigger of a threat than nuclear doom. But if AI doom weren't my first priority, I'm a huge believer in nuclear doom, right? I really do think there's a solid 1% chance every single year that we start nuclear war, which is insane. I think nuclear weapons are vastly underrated, and it's become cool to talk about how nuclear power is so great and we should have been more bullish on nuclear power. And nuclear power is great, but nuclear weapons are so bad. They're it's underrated. People really don't get how bad nuclear weapons are. This is a hobby horse of mine. So, but yeah, look, living in New Zealand, I agree. That's a good move if you're really afraid of nuclear war, but that only eliminates 5% of your risk, because most of your risk is in the AI situation. And the idea that AI is going to spare one island or one bunker, I think that is true for maybe a couple of years, right? But but there's no reason, if the AI is hardcore, which is a very load-bearing claim for me, we are going to have AI that is hardcore. Well, the hardcore thing to do is you don't leave any humans. If a single human exists, that creates a significant risk of somehow spiraling into a chain of events where the AI loses power. And so, of course, you pick off every human. That's what you do if you're a hardcore AI.
Yeah, and I suspect the AI, once it take over, it will want to shape the world to its own image or purpose. So, might decide to remove the oxygen from the atmosphere or tile the planet with supercalculators, this kind of thing. So basically, we will no longer have an environment to live in. The ecosystem will collapse and we die because
there's definitely an analogy. I mean, humans are causing currently the sixth extinction, right? So it's documented that like so many species that used to be alive are no longer alive, like 1 million or something. And it's very simple. It's just like, we see a forest. It's like, okay, well, I'd rather have no trees here. Right? I'd rather just like build a farm or houses or things that I like. Okay, well, you just killed a bunch of species. Like, sorry, I didn't mean to, but I just wanted to optimize the situation to do something different. So definitely, Eliezer points out, if you just have a lot of agents doing stuff, one of the things that they do, if they're efficient, is they use all the different resources and they push the limit of radiating heat away, right? Like productive work requires radiating heat. So anytime an AI is building densely in a space, it becomes like a very hot space. So even just the heat is already tough for humans.
Yeah, we're very fragile. Like the whole planet is a kind of the Goldilocks zone, all those things. If we take a human, you put it in anywhere else in the solar system, we die instantly. So yeah. So now, is it basically our only hope is to not build those systems? So I know you are part of Pose AI. Can you maybe describe a little bit what Pose AI is? Even I did a podcast with someone from Pose AI, the French branch, but and how realistic it is to effectively have an international pause.
So the idea of Pause AI is that if we could slow or stop capabilities progress, then maybe we would have time for alignment progress to catch up, right? It's like those two lines, capability progress, alignment progress. I know some people would argue that they're all one line, it's not two lines, but in my mind, it's still two lines. I do think there's such a thing as alignment theory. If you look at what the Machine Intelligence Research Institute was doing for many years, they really were just trying to lay down foundations of intelligence theory and alignment theory. So for example, even just the insight of instrumental convergence and the idea of what I talked about, the convergent attractor, right? That like AIs are going to self-modify into AIs that are more hardcore, more power-seeking. Like even just that insight was underappreciated before MIRI, the Machine Intelligence Research Institute, popularized it. And then corrigibility, the insight that it's going to be really hard to turn these things off because they're incorrigible. And if you want to just define a simple formalism for an AI that's willing to turn this off, it turns out that you can't, or at least they weren't able to. So there's not even such a thing as like an AI that's calm enough to let you turn it off. So these are the kind of insights that you get when you seriously have smart people do alignment theory, like foundational alignment theory of like, look, regardless of what the current AI technology is, what does it mean for a super intelligent agent to be aligned? What does the specification look like? What are some properties that we can infer about those things? Like very fundamental stuff. And we made some insights, but it's clear we're like many years away from having all the scaffolding we need to have a hope of being like, okay, now let's build something that looks like this thing that we understand as like an aligned AI. And yet, when we go on the capabilities train, unfortunately, capabilities is a fundamentally easier problem because, as Ilya Sutskever says, these AIs want to learn. Like you don't even need supervised learning. So when you do alignment, it's like fundamentally supervised because we're trying to get them to go where we want. Whereas when you do capabilities, you just say like, hey, it's convergent, right? So you don't have to teach them physics. Like they can just use unsupervised learning to let the world reinforce them, and suddenly they know physics really well. So getting good at stuff that's just objective capabilities, there's a lot of ways to do it, like without human involvement, where you just like fall into this reinforcement loop, an unsupervised loop, and you just nail it. And that's why capabilities is just racing way ahead, right? And capabilities, okay, throw in more NVIDIA GPUs, now you have more capabilities. Alignment, throw in more GPUs, you don't get more alignment. So the problem is capabilities just keeps racing way ahead. And the Pause AI movement is like, look, we're fooling ourselves if we think that these tiny little safety departments at these AI companies are going to keep the capabilities safe. That's such a pipe dream. It's insane. The adults in the room should be like, look, they should just admit that they're just, it's a pipe dream. Like this isn't serious what they're doing. And they, Geoffrey Hinton says his words are RLHF is like a pile of crap when it comes to superintelligence. If you look at the exodus from OpenAI, or even, Dario talking about from is having a 10 to 25% PDoom, these experts at the AI companies, they know that their own efforts aren't suited to the task. OpenAI started a super alignment team last year because they knew they needed it. They knew that they didn't have super alignment solved. So they will admit this if you talk to them. So anyway, it comes back to Pause AI of saying like, look, instead of fooling ourselves, instead of doing wishful thinking, why don't we just admit that it looks like the only option is either to have capabilities do what they're going to do to us, basically like let the chips fall, which is probably we die, or we all work together to not build capabilities and try to buy time, and then from that condition try to work more on alignment. And honestly, I don't like it, right? The idea of stopping capabilities, it sounds so insane, it sounds so antithetical to progress, but like when you frame it this way of like, what choice do we have then to try to hit the brakes on something that just seems like it's about to kill us?
Yeah, and I think sometimes maybe a good scenario will be to keep having gain in capabilities, but in narrow domains, like solving cancer research, Alzheimer, and we don't have general intelligence. We just have a lot of very super AI in narrow domains, so that will be easier to control. But
right, yeah, I could talk a little bit about that, right? So like the ideal could be like DeepMind's AlphaFold, where it's like it seems like it's contained to only help you with protein folding problems, and it's not going to like hatch a plan to take over the world. That I think that is a productive avenue. So if we could have like a monitoring system or like regulation where it's like, okay, you have to get your code base approved as being narrow, stay within solving narrow problems, I think that could buy us a few years. The only problem there is like there's problems with everything. So, I mean, I think that's a good approach, but the obvious problems there are just like, well, anytime you get really good at a narrow domain, any domain to get sufficiently good at it kind of makes you want to become generally intelligent anyway, just because having goals helps you solve problems. So like if you're stuck like, oh, for this protein folding, why can I not model this piece? This piece seems extra tricky. Maybe I'll run a sub process to try to go think of reasons how I could like improve reasoning about this. Right? There's kind of like this universal nature to solving any problem by using the same framework of like, okay, well, I'm just going to like chain different actions together, right? Chain strategies together. I'm going to map goals to strategic actions that'll help me achieve the goal. And this is true even when you're working in a narrow domain. So even like, self-driving might be a more intuitive example where it's like you solve 99.9% of the self-driving problems just using like, I don't even know, just reinforcement learning or whatever, like the vision feeds into like the steering wheel actions. But sometimes you get into a really tricky situation where there's like a bunch of humans on the road and they're all like waving their arms trying to tell you something. And now, even though it looks like a narrow domain, even though it looks like driving, if you have modules to like reason about humanity or reason about the very unique circumstance in front of you, well, suddenly the domain of those modules gets very large. And it turns out that it embeds kind of a general intelligence problem, even though it seems like a narrow domain. And I think that's true about most interesting domains, is that in their edge cases, they're just going to embed like general reasoning problems. And then if you train the AI hard enough, you're going to get what happened with humans, right? Humans were just trained hard enough to just like go hunt for prey, right? Like we weren't trained to understand the universe, right? We weren't trained on physics. We didn't get rewarded for writing better equations about how to get to the moon. It just came for free because we got trained on, the savannah, like surviving in the savannah, right? And so I think that's going to happen even with narrow AI.
Right. Yeah, it's kind of knowledge leaks, basically. You need,
right.
It's transdisciplinary is better than just being completely isolated from anything else to solve a problem.
Yeah,
so you almost we might be stuck actually. If you want to solve Alzheimer by giving an AI just data on brains and stuff, maybe it won't be enough. So we will be incentivized to give it more.
Right. There's an analogy that I like to make coming from a computer science background. In computer science, we notice that a lot of things tend to quickly become Turing complete. So, for example, like, you could play Minecraft and maybe I don't even play Minecraft, but maybe it's more common to be like, oh, I want to build a house in Minecraft. But somebody who knows about computer science is like, well, I want to build a computer that's playing Minecraft inside Minecraft, right? So it's like recursive and you can like build anything and it's Turing complete. And people have pointed out that like, you add a new feature to anything, any kind of game or any kind of computer program, be like, oh, let me write this feature where you can like tweak these settings and it'll be more powerful. The moment you start layering on a few new features in a computer program, pretty quickly you've created something Turing complete. Like it's a pretty low bar, and Turing complete just means, okay, now somebody can come in and they can just like program anything into your system. The same, you can program a computer inside Minecraft or, Conway's Game of Life. You can program a computer inside Conway's Game of Life. Like things just, the CSS, cascading style sheets, it was just supposed to be a way to like give web page, like tell what colors and fonts you want on a web page. But of course, pretty quickly they added enough features that now you can program entire functionality inside CSS. You really shouldn't, but it's just like we always get there. We always get to Turing completeness. And there's an analogy there. Just like every computer system wants to be Turing complete, every AI system wants to be what I call goal complete. So every time you think you're building a narrow AI system, if you push it hard enough, it's going to want to just have goals and have a framework for being like, oh, okay, you give me a goal, I will map that goal to actions. That's the natural end state for any kind of narrow artificial intelligence application to get to. The moment that you want to make it a little bit more powerful, there's that leakage, right? The same way cascading style sheets leaks into being like, oh, well, here's a function that can now let you play a game just in the CSS language. The same thing with AI, right? It's like, oh, okay, now AlphaFold can still figure out how to fold the entire Earth, right? Like I really do see a deep analogy there.
Yeah, it's a useful analogy, definitely. Are you sometimes, I guess, you could be worried that if some people agree with the AI Doom argument, they're fully convinced, they might, and if they are maybe mentally unstable, they might become like a new kind of Ted Kaczynski, and
Yeah.
we could see assassination attempt, terrorist attack on data centers, this kind of thing. And I don't know if violence is not a way to solve the AI problem, I guess. But
Right. I mean, I have seen some people in bad faith accuse AI Doom people. The example that sticks to mind is when Eliezer proposed, look, we need an international treaty where it shouldn't be legal to push AI capabilities forward. And of course, like any international treaty that we take seriously, if somebody breaks the treaty, there are consequences up to and including bombing their data centers because they violated the treaty. And Mark Andreessen loves to bring it out at any opportunity that he gets to being like, AI doomers advocate violence, right? As if like the international cooperation structure, the democratic structure of making treaties, in his mind, he's using that as an accusation of violence, where it's, it's kind of like the least violent thing you can do is have a treaty that, yes, is enforced with violence if people who break it, right? Like breaking a treaty is arguably violence. So anyway, but I think to your question, you're saying, well, what about like people going crazy? What about like alarming people? And yeah, it's fun and it's easy and fun to go talk about all these second order consequences of believing this particular belief. I personally don't spend much time talking about second order consequences because to me, the more interesting question is like, is this the right belief? If it's not the right belief, right? If there's a small chance of this being the right belief, then you could be like, look, there's such a tiny chance that Liron is right and Liron is making people get alarmed. Yeah, if the chance that I'm right is tiny, fine. But I don't think the chances that I'm right is tiny, right? If I have a significant chance of being right that we're doomed, then forget the second order effects. Like we got to just talk about the claim.
Yeah, of course. The consequences are obviously more terrible than the alternative. So yeah, and how do you I guess sometimes when I think about AGI, I'm not entirely sure how we're going to the brief moment we'll have to play with AGI, how it will look like. Is it like a chatbot, basically like ChatGPT, but it's AGI, or do you think we'll have humanoid robots in the streets, maybe an app on my phone that talks to me and solve my problems?
Yeah, that is very hard to predict, right? I don't consider myself, I don't think anybody is actually able to predict that because it comes down to a couple questions. One is just like, okay, how fast are robots just going to get more and more human-like and animal-like at their movements? I think there's major progress happening there, right? Like, I mean, walking, robots seem to have gotten very good at walking, which like 10 years ago was still a pretty hard problem for them. And I do actually think that might be one of the things that finally gets people as scared as they should be is I like to talk about this example of like if you have a humanoid robot like a Tesla Optimus, if it comes into your house and it's not even remotely controlled, it's like operating autonomously and it's like it can kind of like beat you in a fight, right? Like it can beat you at like physical competitions where you can just go a wrestling match like human versus Tesla Optimus. And if it's wrestling you down and it's on top of you and like it won't let you get up, unless like, somebody else like the moderator presses a button or whatever, at that point, people might be like, wow, okay, maybe we really should get more guarantees on these things. So maybe that'll appropriately raise the fear level because there's no doubt that this will happen. And they'll be like, okay, finally, this isn't a chatbot. This is an agent that I don't even see what advantage I have over it as a human because it can come, it can come put me in a cage, right? The same way we put animals in a cage. This thing can come and put me in a cage and close the door and never open it. Right, if it has a certain programming.
I think it's bound if we have.
And then to your question of like, what's going to happen first? Yeah, you want to talk about that? Okay. Yeah, so how fast is that going to happen? I don't know. I think pretty fast. But then how fast is the chatbot intelligence amplification going to happen? Also fast, right? So it's kind of hard to predict which comes first. If you ask me what do AIs lack today, a lot of people give bad answers. A lot of people are like, well, they're just stochastic parrots. They can never go out of distribution. They can never be creative, which to me is like just totally wrong. I can't believe people are saying that. If I had to describe it, I would just say they're not robust. So like you ask them questions, they keep saying smart things, they keep getting the questions right, except sometimes they get the questions wrong. So like their hit rate isn't 100%. And then when they get a question wrong, they don't kind of notice and be like, you know what, I'm not sure about that. Let me correct my mistake. And so they just get mistakes compounding. And that seems to be like the common issue with them, right? Is they'll make occasional mistakes and they don't fix it. And by the time they're a couple paragraphs in, it's just like pointless, right? They've gone off the rails. So if you just keep making generations that like somehow make fewer mistakes, which sounds crazy, but that's kind of what we saw going from GPT-2 to GPT-3 to GPT-4. It's just like fewer mistakes happening somehow, right? So maybe we'll get to play with an agent that like somehow makes fewer mistakes and somehow can like do bigger jobs, and you know, and that'll happen on a faster timeline than the robots. I don't know, but that's just how I think about it.
Yeah, definitely. Because the robot thing, I think it's actually, when you look at self-driving cars, we didn't have to wait too long before a car killed someone. And I think if we start to have humanoid robots, it's bound to happen that sometimes one robot will push old lady in the stairs by mistakes, and then we will have newspaper talking about it, and it's kind of an outrage online because this, like the first case of a robot killing a human, this kind of big headlines. And that might be almost what we need to wake up. But maybe it's too late, because I don't see humanoid robots coming before the 2030 as a common thing. But
maybe, but also keep in mind, but remote operation makes them a lot more useful. So you can actually imagine owning an Optimus and just having your, $5 an hour person in the Philippines who just like does all your housework by remotely operating your robot.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a good point. I've never think about that. Or even like just because I live in Australia, my family is in France. So I would love to be able to, like take a VR headset, be in a robot in France and hug my family. And, it would be like an amazing experience, more than a video call. So that's maybe the next step.
Yeah, and then of course that's all training data for the AI.
Yeah. Is there any sci-fi films or books that you think depict realistic takeover or no?
I think there's a shortage of that. I mean, I try to watch whatever movie I can that I think could do that, but I definitely don't think there's many. I think Terminator is pretty good. I mean, I don't think that it really tells you like why the AI wants to destroy people, but I think the reason why is just like pretty simple. It just like it gets that goal into it somehow. Like it's a convergent goal, right? Or it just gets a goal that we don't like. What I like about Terminator is just the depiction of like, okay, well, these robots are able to overpower humanity. Like they're very powerful. They're not aligned with us. And this is what happens. So I like that part of Terminator. And then the movie Don't Look Up, it's not even directly about AIs, but I actually like that movie a lot because what I think is super realistic, the scientist, Dr. Isherwell, who wants to go mine the asteroid, to me, that's very much like the AI labs where it's like, okay, looks like we're doomed, but look, this next GPT is coming out, okay, and it's going to help you for work more, and we're going to keep building. And like, yes, we don't know when we're pushing it too far, but we will figure it out. We will steer it away. And what I really like about Don't Look Up is like the scientist is saying all this stuff. The day comes, right? Like the final hour, the moment of truth comes, and they just fail and everybody dies. And I'm like, yep, that looks like a good portrayal of the current timeline.
Yeah, definitely. When I watched this film, I was also thinking about AI. And the Terminator is actually good as well, except the time traveling part, obviously. Yeah. And I think even the humanoid robot with glowing red eyes, it's a bit too much. But just the Skynet is realistic because it's the US military using it to have a strategic advantage. And we're starting to see this side of the AI. Today, the labs like Anthropic and OpenAI, they're starting to have contracts with the Department of Defense in the US. So, and I think there was this, what's his name? Leopold something,
Aschenbrenner.
Complicated name. Yeah, Aschenbrenner. He wrote the report and his conclusion is like the first, it will become a geopolitical strategic advantage to have AGI. So the first country who can master the power will dominate the world, and we'll see those big government taking over the AI labs maybe.
Yeah, so the doomer response to Aschenbrenner's work, and many like it, is just that like it's not the alignment problem isn't solved. So Leopold's work just assumes that we can keep building AI that we can continue to control. And the actions that the AI does represent the actions of the human operator. Now, maybe Leopold's work is what the world needed because Leopold, he has a bunch of implications of like, look, if we had these really super superhuman servants, things that did what we want and were really powerful, that would upend geopolitics. That would change everything. And a lot of people read that and they're like, wow, this is going to change everything. But what Leopold left out is like, okay, but they're actually not going to do what we want. They're going to do what they want, right? And then we won't be able to stop them. So no country is going to win. So that whole framing of like, yeah, we need to go be first, it's just so bad and unproductive. So like, I tend to think that I'm sad that the work exists, because as much as I appreciate like building the urgency, the frame is just, he assumed so much. Most people who read it, they don't even think to ask the question, right? Because they don't have that background. I mean, I personally, if I hadn't read Eliezer Yudkowsky, I don't think I would think to ask the question of, can we control AIs? It just feels so intuitive of like, yeah, we built them. They're going to do what we want. And Leopold really didn't help that question get asked.
Yeah, okay. So another question that's a bit outside the AI topic. It's about cryonics. Are you, I don't know, like it's transhumanism now. Are you for cryonics? Would you sign up for it? And I guess, yeah.
Yeah, I'm very much for it. Full disclosure, I've attempted to sign up a couple of times and I never got through the process because it was just like a little bit annoying. I really should. I guess part of it is just because like, I don't know, I guess I just don't feel viscerally that excited about being cryopreserved, but like rationally, should I do it? Yeah, totally. I really should do it. If I could snap my fingers and do it, I would. But yeah, I'm very much for it. And of course, the value, the expected value of it is obviously lower since I think doom is like imminent, but there's definitely like tens of percentages of chance that we're not doomed. And then within the worlds that we're not doomed, there's definitely like a 10% chance that cryonics will work. So like, yeah, I should do it. I'm cryocrastinating, right? I'm procrastinating on cryonics, but like, fundamentally, is it a good idea? Yeah, I mean, it's standard transhumanism, right? Like, why wouldn't it be a good idea?
Yeah. Sometimes I also agree, but I've got this, I guess, like a fear that if in the future someone wakes you up, but it kind of scan your brain, put you in the simulation, suddenly you become, it's kind of dangerous in a way, because you might be in a hell simulation. You don't really know what's going to happen in the future. Maybe the future will be terrible, and I guess. One good thing about death, it's kind of permanent, but maybe in the future, death won't be even an option if you're suffering. So that's scary.
Right. Well, I think that gets to the related discussion of, S risks, right? So suffering risks. So, and I tend to like never even talk about those or think about those, because for me, it's just like, okay, the AI is just going to destroy the future. We would have had a great future where we would have stayed on the trajectory. The world keeps getting better. The economy keeps growing. Things keep getting nicer. And the AI is going to take all that to zero. But then there's the possibility of actually the AI is going to take all that to negative infinity, right? Like not just zero. Like it's going to just be like so bad. It's going to be like way worse than an empty universe. Like we will wish that the universe was empty because AI is going to make it so bad. I mean, I tend to not think about that, because just like I think the AI is likely to not want what we want, I also think that the AI is unlikely to want something that involves creating a bunch of suffering sentience. It seems like it would have to go out of its way to do that. Now, if we try to make a wish and we make it wrong, it's possible that wish involves a bunch of suffering sentience. So don't get me wrong, I think the probability is significant. I just see it as like a relatively low, like a less than 50% chance. So I just don't spend much time worrying about stress. I worry about just going to zero.
Yeah, makes sense. And in the case of cryonics, there is always this, if you think about a future where our descendant will bother to wake up the dead, it means they're probably fine. It's kind of a future where
exactly.
Everything is solved. So it's kind of fun for them to wake up their ancestors and greet them and give them a good life, because they know they escape death in a way. I mean, we would probably do it if we had the power.
Yeah, I think a good metaphor is that being cryonically preserved, it's like an ambulance ride to the future. Everybody would accept an ambulance ride over space, right? So why don't we expect an ambulance ride over time? And like this is clearly marked like ambulance patient. It might help your intuition to be like, look, we're not talking about like 1,000 years here. Like if cryonics works, it'll probably work within 100 years, 200 years, probably less than 100 years if cryonics ever does work. So it's like, do we really think that society of less than 100 years from now is going to be like that mean to us? I feel like it's just like an ambulance ride. Yeah,
it's always good analogy. Another question, like let's say AI alignment is solved, or Pose AI works and we have enough time. But anyway, in 2050, we have a powerful super aligned intelligence. How a positive future look like for you? What's your utopia in a way?
Yeah, my utopia. So I don't consider myself that insightful on utopia. I'm just aware that there's a problem of defining utopia. I think Nick Bostrom tackled it pretty capably in his book, where he's just saying like, look, there's no, like, it's not that obvious what utopia should be when you just have zero constraints. he makes a good point of like a lot of the things that we like, they're just mixed in. He uses a great analogy of the exoskeleton. Like insects have an exoskeleton instead of bones, and it like keeps their innards in an organized shape because they have this, I don't even know, like this cage around them. So for example, like, yeah, it would be great to be healthy without having to actually do the work of exercising. But at the same time, like exercise is kind of like an opportunity to challenge myself or maybe like see nature if I'm exercising outside. And now I'm losing that because I'm just sitting in my exercise machine. So yeah, I mean, what's left in the end? I have no idea, right? I really have no idea. But at the same time, do I want to get cancer? No, right? So it's like, I just feel like, yeah, I'll keep making tweaks. Maybe I'll go too far. Hopefully I'll have the ability to like get it back, right? To have like an undo button. Like, I don't know. I'm up for the challenge of like trying to find some kind of transhumanist balance. But yeah, I mean, like, what is Liron Shapira's utility function over the entire universe? What is Liron Shapira's heaven? I really don't know. I would try to tread carefully. I'd be like, okay, yes, I'll cure cancer, but I'll try to like make very minimal changes until I feel more confident.
Yeah, and usually transhumanist thinking is we don't want to impose one future. It's more like, let's give as many options as possible to people if they want to, change and transform to what's the name? Morphological freedom. You can have a simulation of yourself and live in a heaven that you created, or you could explore the universe in a robot form. Whatever you do, you basically.
Right, you do you. And it's just like, I mean, it's a little bit ironic that like, I get a lot of meaning or like passion or interest in my life to be like, hey, look, this Doom problem is like such a big problem. But then it's like, just like the AI companies who are building the Doom, even me, the person who's saying don't build Doom, neither of us can actually say exactly where we want to go. I mean, the AI companies, at least they have a coherent plan of like, look, we're going to just like have a tool to solve all our problems. Some people level the accusation at the AI companies are like, look, if you can't describe heaven, you don't even know what heaven is, and you're building something that might risk missing heaven or getting us to hell. So therefore, don't build it. Maybe that's a little bit weak. Like maybe they don't need to fully describe heaven. It's just, it's like if I'm making virtual reality, if I'm making other kind of tools, do I have to be able to describe heaven? So maybe it's not their fault that they can't describe heaven. But when their probability of hell is sufficiently high, then maybe they should be able to describe heaven. Maybe they should be able to describe like what's the ultimate human value. I don't know, something to think about.
Yeah. Another quick one. Do you think we are living in a simulation?
Yeah, my P simulation. I just tend to say also around 50%, just because it's like, on one hand, if I'm just trying to keep things simple, then it's tempting to be like, okay, this is just the base level universe. But on the other hand, I don't know, I guess gun to my head, I would say that we are in a simulation just because for me, what's convincing is like, look, in my own lifetime, I'm seeing convincing virtual reality come on the scene because I definitely remember being a kid and be like, yeah, virtual reality sucks. Like, it's not convincing at all. And now it's like, okay, this definitely looks almost like my life, right? Like this is starting to be a very convincing simulation. Yeah. And of course, that's even without Neuralink, right? That's even without virtual reality at like the brain level. So the fact that I'm alive to see the creation of AGI and the creation of, perfect quality virtual reality, I've already seen the creation of perfect quality screens. Like when I look at my computer screen right now, like, that's a perfect screen as far as I'm concerned. Like I don't need that screen to be any better ever. And that came about in my own life. Like there didn't used to be screens like that. So that's like pretty indicative that like something special is happening like in my own lifetime compared to like every other human who's ever lived, which to me makes more sense if it's just like, okay, well, I'm just one of many simulations of like a particularly interesting time.
Yeah, definitely. I think I would say my probability of simulation is also high, but I wouldn't go above 50% because I think we still lack the proof of concept of consciousness being instantiated in a simulated environment. Because if we, like NPCs so far in GTA or those games, they don't seem to have consciousness. And if maybe it will happen, but once we reach that threshold and we have a conscious agent in a simulation, then I would update and say, okay, it's very likely we are also in a simulation. But before this point, I think it's maybe not.
Well, that's a good point. I mean, I agree that would be another milestone that makes me think I'm more in the simulation. It's just, I tend to think all of these things I mentioned are milestones. Like when screens got good enough that they're like as good as my vision, I consider that a milestone toward thinking that we live in a simulation. Like anytime one of these like major recursive technologies comes online that can potentially like take over your senses, to me that increases the probability that we're in a simulation.
Yeah. And another, I guess, probability is the probability we are in the many world interpretation of quantum mechanics. What you think it's the most
so I mean, I don't know if you can put a
interpretation?
probability, that's more like a probability over like who's going to win the argument of epistemology, right?
Right.
But that's, I mean, don't get me wrong. I think many worlds. So Eliezer Yudkowsky famously said you could use quantum many worlds as a rationality litmus test. If somebody can read the argument for the Copenhagen interpretation compared to the argument for, Everett many worlds, and they can't see that many worlds is just the correct way to do epistemology, then they're like not qualified to be a rationalist. Like there's only one right interpretation. I find that argument very compelling. I'm not an expert on quantum. I've dipped in a few times with some like high level explainers with like a little bit of math. So I kind of get it, but I really don't. So I'm not the best person to speak on it, but like the specific properties that Eliezer listed of why it's so much more compelling, they make very strong sense to me. Like the idea that Copenhagen, okay, it collapses into one world, but it's just like it's a non-local event. Like there's all these really nice mathematical properties that you just say like, oh no, the universe just doesn't have these properties because it's so important that there's only one world. But it's like, why? Why are you making these epistemological trade-offs? It makes no sense to me.
Yeah. And I guess if we live in a multi-world, many world from the Everett branches, some branches will probably align AGI. So it's kind of almost comforting thought to think somewhere in the multiverse, we are fine.
Okay, so we can generalize the question, like, what is my P multiverse, right? Like Max Tegmark has a really good book from like 10 years ago. I forgot something about universe, but he talks about like Tegmark worlds, level 1, 2, 3, 4. Even if quantum many worlds is false, which I'm pretty sure it's true, but if it's false, well, maybe the actual size of the universe is hyper exponential or infinite, in which case you have like every possible version of yourself like infinitely many times. So, and I think that my P multiverse is very high. And of course, if there's a stack of simulations, then, then there's multiverses in that sense. I would be shocked if this is like the only thing that's real, right? It's like our one observable universe of like, really just this? I think there's more real than this.
Okay. And so final question, if you could invite anyone to your podcast, who would it be and why? Maybe, a few names if you want to, just not single out one person.
Yeah, great. So my goal for Doom Debates is, I think this is what society needs. We need a forum where people who are making important claims about AI, they're expected to defend and debate it. So, for example, when Mark Zuckerberg in a recent interview with Lex Friedman, I think it was, and he's just like, I'm not too worried about like the Doom stuff. We're just happy to release open source. We don't see too much danger. Like when he says stuff like that, it's like, all right, Mark, come into the ring. Like today you will be debating Eliezer Yudkowsky or something, right? Like this is how our society needs to judge these kind of things because this is a bold claim. Or similarly, when Dario was asked like a week ago about his P-Doom, and he's like, I don't like to talk about P-Doom. We should just kind of continue and make sure we get the benefits. It's like, okay, Dario, you will now be debating Max Tegmark, right? Like it's like we need to have this forum. You can't just let these leaders just like make these statements unchallenged, and the people should demand it. So my goal with Doom Debates is basically that everybody who's making prominent statements in AI, including the Doomers, should come hash it out. Right. And society lacks that technology. It's crazy. Here we are in 2024. We don't have debate technology. We just have these softball interviews, right? People come on stage, answer softball questions, leave. That's it.
Yeah, that's definitely a great medium for that. And you've done a good job with, all the podcast, the episodes, even when you react, because obviously maybe it's difficult to get Steven Pinker yet. Maybe you will be able, I hope you'll be able to get it one day. But
so it happened once. If you remember Keith Duggar from Machine Learning Street Talk. It was a good case. I've proven out the pipeline, my reaction episode to debate pipeline, because I listened to Machine Learning Street Talk, which is a great podcast, and one of the co-hosts, Keith Duggar, was on it, and I did a reaction episode where it's just me talking over the episode, and then Keith Duggar reached out, and he's like, hey, I'm happy to come on, and then I had an actual respectful one-on-one debate with Keith Duggar, so hopefully I can keep building up this reaction to debate pipeline.
Yeah, it's a good way to get attraction. And are you thinking of inviting maybe Eliezer Yudkowsky? That would be a fun conversation.
Yeah, so, I have no confirmation from Eliezer himself. I do know him reasonably well, but he always talks about having very limited energy and focus, so I really want to make it worth his time. So my plan for Eliezer is basically like build up the audience to 5 or 10x bigger than it is, and then get a bunch of audience questions, get a bunch of audience interest, and then bring all that to Eliezer and be like, come on, Eliezer, the crowd wants this, and then he'll probably do it. Yeah,
of course. Okay, great. Well, it was a very interesting conversation. I hope the audience will follow your channel as well. I will encourage them to do so, and thank you again for your participation and for your work. I think it's very important.
Thanks, Gaëtan. Yeah, this was super fun. Thanks for your work as well.